Some conversations feel like sticking your hand into a beehive. You already know what's inside, you know what happens when you disturb it, and still, because it has to be said, because someone has to say it, you reach in anyway, slowly, carefully, bracing for the sound before it even comes. I want to tell you about a conversation that took me weeks to prepare for and about 20 seconds to lose. Because buried inside that wreckage was a realization that changed how I understood everything happening in my home. This is Entangled in Chaos, where we look at the patterns underneath the pain, so you can understand the chaos and break the pattern. Let me take you back to that kitchen. The house was quiet that evening, but quiet in that house never meant peace. It meant the space between, the pause before the next thing. If you've lived in a home like this, you know the difference between calm and quiet. Calm is safety. Quiet is just the part where you hold your breath. I had a question to ask, an ordinary one. The kind of question families ask each other all the time without incident. Her grandmother, the woman who half-raised her, was moving into the house in about 6 weeks. That's it. That was the entire topic. A logistical change, a calendar fact. I wanted to know gently how she felt about it, whether she had thoughts, whether there was anything she needed. That's all. On paper, it's nothing. But I didn't treat it like nothing. I'd learned better than that. I waited for what looked like a good mood. I rehearsed the words in my head, trimmed them down, softened the edges, removed anything that could be mistaken for pressure. I chose the moment the way you'd choose where to step in a dark room full of things that break. And when the moment finally seemed right, I asked, carefully, quietly, like setting something fragile on a table. 20 seconds. That's about how long it took before the room turned inside out. Suddenly it wasn't a question about Grandma moving in. It was an attack. How dare I bring this up now? Didn't I know she'd had a long day? Why was I always putting things on her? Why was everything her problem? The timing was cruel. The question was unfair. I was the one causing stress. I was the source of the chaos. And just like that, the topic was gone, vanished. We were no longer talking about the future. We were talking about me, my timing, my insensitivity, my failure to read the room. The actual subject had evaporated, and in its place was a fire I now had to put out. Here's the strange part. I wasn't surprised. I was shocked, but I wasn't surprised. And if you've lived this, you know exactly what that contradiction feels like. Your body jolts at the explosion, but some tired part of you just sighs and thinks, of course, again. Let me pause the story here, because this is where it gets interesting. For a long time, I believed these blow-ups were about me, that I'd chosen the wrong words, the wrong tone, the wrong 5-minute window. I genuinely thought if I could just get the delivery perfect, calm enough, warm enough, careful enough, the conversation might survive. But that belief was quietly destroying me, because it kept the entire burden on my shoulders. If the explosion was my fault, then avoiding the explosion was my job. And so I became something I never intended to be. Not a husband, not a parent, a technician, an emotional bomb technician, tiptoeing through my own home, diffusing devices that got planted faster than I could disarm them. And here's the first thing I want you to sit with, because it's the thing that finally frayed me. The meltdown was not random. The meltdown had a function. Watch what it accomplished. The second the explosion started, the conversation ended. The topic was dropped. The pressure disappeared, the future got postponed, and I, the one who'd carefully brought it up, retreated, apologized, backed away, tried to soothe. Every single time, the eruption produced the exact same result. Nothing had to change. Now think about that. If a behavior reliably makes something unpleasant go away, what happens to that behavior? It gets stronger. Not through some evil master plan, I want to be clear about that. This wasn't calculated villainy. It was something far more human and far more common. There's a principle in behavioral psychology called negative reinforcement. It's often misunderstood, so let me put it plainly. Negative reinforcement isn't punishment. It's when a behavior gets strengthened because it removes something uncomfortable. You feel the discomfort, you do the thing, the discomfort disappears, and your brain files that away. That worked. Do it again next time. For her, responsibility was the discomfort, and panic was the thing that made it disappear. So over the years, without anyone deciding it, a rule got written into the household, not on paper, in the nervous system, and the rule was simple. If she melts down, nobody makes her deal with reality. That's the pattern. Panic became a strategy. Chaos became a shield. Let me go deeper, because understanding why this happens is what turns your frustration into something more useful: clarity. She was, at that point, in her late 20s, a legal adult by every measure, but emotional age and physical age are not the same thing, and they don't always travel together. In some people, for all kinds of reasons rooted in how they were raised and what they were protected from, emotional development stalls. The body keeps aging. The capacity to tolerate discomfort does not. So you end up with someone who is 29 on the outside and somewhere around 12 on the inside, specifically in the one area that matters most here: the ability to sit with responsibility without treating it as an assault. For her, future planning didn't feel like planning. It felt like an attack. A basic question didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like pressure being loaded onto her chest. Accountability didn't feel like fairness. It felt unbearable. And reality itself, the plain fact that life requires you to make decisions and carry weight, felt fundamentally unfair. When your nervous system codes ordinary responsibility as danger, you don't respond to it like an adult weighing options. You respond to it like prey: fight, flight, freeze, outrage, or avoidance, or a complete shutdown, not because you're weak, because your alarm system was miscalibrated a long time ago and no one ever helped you recalibrate it. And this is why I want to be careful here, because the goal of understanding this is not contempt. When you see the 12-year-old underneath the 29-year-old, the behavior stops being a personal insult. It becomes something almost tragic. She wasn't trying to ruin my evening. She was trying to survive a feeling she'd never been taught to hold. And this matters just as much. Understanding why someone does something is not the same as agreeing to keep absorbing it. That distinction saved my life. Compassion for the wound does not mean you volunteer to keep bleeding for it. Now let me widen the lens, because there's a second realization that hit me even harder than the first. This wasn't one bad conversation. It wasn't even one difficult person. It was a system. Because she didn't build this alone. There was another force in that house: her mother. And if the daughter was the one who detonated, the mother was the one who'd built the conditions where detonation was normal. Volatility as a baseline, conflict as a default setting, emotional weather that could turn without warning. The daughter grew up learning that chaos was simply how a home operates. So what I was actually living inside was two mirrors facing each other. The mother reflecting chaos into the daughter reflecting it back. Each one confirming for the other that this, the tension, the eruptions, the eggshells, is just how life is. Between two mirrors, an image repeats forever. And I had walked into the space between them and mistaken it for a family I could reason with. That's the thing about systems. They're not a series of incidents. They're a machine, and every machine needs its parts to keep running. So here's the question I finally had to ask myself: what was my part? Because I had won, I want to be honest about that. I wasn't just a victim of this system. I was a functioning component of it. My role was the stabilizer, the absorber, the one who softened, adapted, waited, apologized, and sacrificed. Every time I swallowed a need to keep the peace, every time I chose a better moment that never came, every time I diffused instead of insisted, I was oiling the gears. I was keeping the machine alive. The careful approach felt like wisdom. It was really just fuel. And this leads to the hardest truth in this whole story, the one I want you to take with you. Systems do not change because one person inside them becomes more patient. They don't change because you find gentler words or better timing. You can become the most careful, most reasonable, most emotionally intelligent person in the house, and the machine will happily keep running because your carefulness is exactly what it needs from you. A system only changes when someone stops playing their assigned role. That was the exit, not a perfect conversation. There is no perfect conversation because the conversation was never allowed to succeed. Its failure was the whole point. The explosion was never the obstacle standing between us and progress. The explosion was the pattern. So let me talk about what changing your role actually looks like, because I don't want to leave you with a metaphor and no map. First, you stop treating the other person's emotions as your responsibility to manage. This is the single hardest shift, and it sounds cold until you understand it. It doesn't mean you're cruel. It means you recognize that another adult's emotional reaction belongs to them. When she panicked, my job was not to make the panic stop. My job was to stay steady and let the panic be hers. You can be kind and still not pick up something that isn't yours to carry. Second, you learn to separate the topic from the reaction. When the conversation exploded, the explosion tried to become the new subject. Suddenly, we're debating my timing instead of discussing the actual issue. The move is to notice that hijack and calmly refuse it, not by arguing, just by declining to abandon the real topic. We can talk about the timing later. Right now, I'm asking about grandma moving in. You don't chase the fire. You keep your hand on the original thread. Third, you let a conversation end without resolving it, and you bring it back later, unchanged. This one is quietly powerful. Part of how the meltdown works is that it makes you so exhausted you never raise the subject again. So the countermove is simple persistence without escalation. The topic returns, calmly, the next day or the next week, not as an attack, as a fact. Reality doesn't go away just because someone panicked and you stop pretending it does. And fourth, the deepest one, you accept that you cannot build a shared future with someone who treats every step toward that future as an assault. That's not bitterness, it's arithmetic. If every planning conversation self-destructs, then plans cannot be made, and a life cannot be built on a foundation that detonates on contact. Recognizing that isn't giving up on the person. It's stopping the fantasy that carefulness alone will fix what only they can fix. Notice what none of these are. None of them are about changing her. I spent years trying to change her, or the mother, or the atmosphere of the house. Every one of these tools is about changing me, specifically, about stepping out of the role that kept the whole thing spinning. So let me bring us back to that kitchen one last time. The version of me who asked that question was still hoping, still believing that the right words, delivered at the right moment, could unlock a normal conversation. That version of me walked toward the hive expecting that this time, maybe, it wouldn't sting. The version of me who walked away understood something different, that the sting wasn't a malfunction, it was the design, that the house wasn't tense because I kept getting the timing wrong, it was tense because tension was the system's way of protecting everyone from the unbearable weight of growing up. And that no amount of my carefulness would ever be the thing that changed it. Here's the reflection I'll leave you with. We're taught that love means endless patience, that if we just try harder, soften more, understand deeper, we can reach anyone, and there's beauty in that. But there's also a trap inside it, because some systems are built to consume exactly that kind of patience. They run on it. Your endless understanding isn't melting the ice. It's the fuel keeping the machine warm. The most compassionate thing I ever did was not find better words. It was to stop volunteering to be the one who absorbs the explosion. You cannot save someone by standing close enough to catch every blast. Sometimes the only way the machine ever stops is when one person finally steps out of their place inside it and lets the silence be someone else's to fill. If any of this sounded like your kitchen, your conversation, your years of careful timing, you're not alone, and you're not the reason it kept exploding. Understanding the pattern is the first step out of it. Subscribe and stay with us, because the more clearly you see the machine, the harder it becomes for the machine to keep using you. Understand the chaos, break the pattern,